25. Hey everyone, you've joined me in mid-conversation with Olivia Troye and Miles Taylor. They are two former national security officials who were part of the first Trump administration. Both of them resigned once they realized that Stephen Miller is a vicious white nationalist fascist, and Donald Trump has no fidelity to the Constitution and rule of law. And unfortunately, they have been both been targeted by this malicious administration, by this 79-year-old cankled man who, instead of lowering the prices of groceries and helping soy farmers get jobs, just has this endless festivus, this grievance list. And unfortunately, Miles, you all might, if you don't know, Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs were the two individuals a couple of months ago that Donald decided, oh, of all the things that are happening in this world, let me sign an executive order trying to go after Miles for being a traitor. Why? Because Miles was essentially a whistleblower, wrote the book Anonymous, talking about all the terrible, terrifying, scary shit he saw. So Miles is literally being targeted by the Trump administration. Olivia has received death threats. And here we are, folks. The day is October 9th, 12:05 p.m. God knows what new fresh horrors will await us because the day is young. And what we've been seeing, and I said this to Olivia right before you joined on, Miles, this is the first time Miles has joined, is it's the world's worst I told you so for me and Olivia, because we've been talking for the past year, and everything that we said is coming true. Trump is aiming for forever power. They don't care about the rule of law. Stephen Miller is unleashed. They're going after their critics. What we've been saying on the show is they're looking for a ragtag fire to come up with an excuse to crush their critics. Now they've openly talked about the Insurrection Act. We've been talking about this show. Donald Trump is not opposed to it. Stephen Miller yesterday, 2 days ago, blurted out plenary authority and then froze. Oops, I made a mistake on CNN. And then I want to frame all this with the tweet that Miles did, and there's a lot to talk about. We'll connect all the dots here today, but Miles did this tweet that I retweeted, and I'm going to quote Miles. I co-wrote Trump's first anti-terrorism plan in 2017, 2018. He's not trying to stop left-wing terrorism. He is staging it. His troop deployments are a false flag meant to provoke a response in order to justify harsh crackdowns. This is now very obvious. And Miles, I retweeted that saying that's the plan. Let's talk about the first part. How is he staging left-wing terrorism, not trying to stop it?
Well, I used the term false flag very intentionally here, Waj, because the past few years we have seen that terminology, false flags and psyops and things like that alleged to be underway by our government. And almost every time you see that lexicon deployed on social media, you can reflexively ignore it because you can know with great confidence that it's a conspiracy theorist that doesn't know at all how government works, doesn't know what a psychological operation is, and doesn't understand the meaning of false flag. Until now, because the same side of the political spectrum that propagates those notions now has control of all of the levers of federal power and is engaging in actual false flag operations. What do I mean by that? Definitionally, something that's a false flag is either an event that is meant to masquerade as another event or to provoke that thing to fruition. And we are seeing the latter. Okay, what do I mean by that more specifically? This administration says that left-wing terrorism is a mortal threat to this country. There is not a left-wing terrorism crisis in this country. I say that as a lifelong conservative and counterterrorism professional. There isn't. But what the administration knows will happen is if they send U.S. troops into American cities, they are likely to provoke widespread protests, the majority of which, statistically, will be peaceful. But there's always 1% or 1/100% that becomes violent. So if they can make the protests big enough, they can get B-roll of enough violence to justify the crackdown that they really want to implement. That's a false flag. They are, put another way, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By going after non-existent left-wing terrorism, there's a good chance that they create it and they use that imagery to be able to consolidate control around the United States. That is the authoritarian playbook. A student of history knows that. and an idiot does not.
And, before I turn to you, Olivia, in the summer, Stephen Miller revealed the plot, and I've been focusing on the actual quotes of Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. I think we should take them literally and seriously. I've told people just believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. And that flaming left-wing communist rag, Wall Street Journal, in the summer, actually had a piece on Stephen Miller and the deployment of ICE agents against innocent Los Angeles residents. And they said that he was the one who greenlit ICE agents terrorizing Home Depots and 7-Elevens, and he wanted to provoke, as Miles said, a confrontation. In the summer, Stephen Miller used the word invasion, said we're being invaded, and then used that to justify suspending habeas corpus and invoke the Alien Enemies Act. In a rare rebuke, very rare rebuke to the Trump administration, the Supreme Court said, nah, you can't use the Alien Enemies Act. Stephen Miller then used the word insurrection. And then earlier this week, Donald Trump, when asked point blank, are you open to using the Insurrection Act? He didn't say no. And so what we're witnessing right now is what happened in LA, is happening in Portland, is happening in Chicago. The border's no longer in Mexico. The border's crossing all of us. Your take on what Miles said, and specifically the likelihood that this administration, because Stephen Miller, unfortunately, I'm sorry for your trauma. His
I'm still going to therapy, Waj. It's okay.
Yeah. Wow. Do you take it literally and seriously that this administration is going to invoke the Insurrection Act? And can you tell people what that is?
Yeah, I don't have any doubt that they will at least try to enact it. I think they will. And I think this has been a long time coming. I know you and I have talked about this, Waj, where there were discussions on this in 2020. And to Miles's point of what he was saying, like, this has been a long-term plan because the focus on left-wing terrorism started during the first Trump administration. And now the difference is that they have all the levers of power underneath them with people willing to enact it and carry it out, right? There's leadership. You no longer have the leadership that was there standing in the way saying, hey, no, that's actually not legal. Or no, I don't think that that's actually the best use of federal law enforcement. Or that's not how we do actual law enforcement operations. That is all out the window. Right. That is no longer where we are right now. I think when you have paramilitary forces around the country being deployed, because that's literally what it looked like to me in Chicago when you have people rappelling down buildings, people being torn out of their homes. Like this is not what I would consider to be border patrol operations in the middle of U.S. cities. Right. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that. But that is certainly the imagery that they're trying to evoke. And I think it is, Miller's policy of deterrence, because that is what he thinks deters people. That is the creating the fear, creating the control. He also thinks that that's an effective immigration policy, by the way. That is really the underlying thing here on it, too, is that they're enacting immigration policy by utilizing these efforts because they think it's deterrence. And Miles knows this very well because we've been there for discussions in the past together in policy meetings where these conversations were being had, right? And so now we get to the Insurrection Act, which I do think is coming, and I think it's a way for them to enact more control. Because by using the Insurrection Act, you can bypass governors, right? That's the whole thing, because now you control the narrative. And the whole thing is that you can override civilian law enforcement. That's been a worry of mine, where you can actually override state and local law enforcement by using that and using the military against the American people, where you're suppressing this under the guise of like law and order. The famous phrase that Donald Trump likes to use, right? And so that is what I'm worried about, because it is an act that's been used sparingly in the past. This was a thing that came up during 2020, during the George Floyd protests, when they occurred, where they wanted to use military against people. There was discussions about shooting the protesters that we all watched horrified. And now here we are, where it's sort of like a continuation of weakening checks and balances is what it is, right? And I think using that, they can use different levers to really start to kill the narrative where, it was civilian over control over the military. That's traditionally how it's been. I am concerned at what this looks like in terms of the combination of all these powers with no longer having separation in it, and also looking at what happens to traditional independence, freedoms, and norms.
I want to do a follow up and then give it to Miles. But I remember last time you were on, Olivia, you mentioned that Stephen Miller has been obsessed with bombing Mexico and bombing Latin America. I've been trying to connect the dots for folks. I said, pay attention to what's happening in Venezuela. And unfortunately, I think we paid attention a little too late because yesterday, I don't know if you saw the vote, and sadly, Fetterman joined the Republicans in essentially giving a green light for Donald Trump as the president to unilaterally and extrajudicially kill, let's just be honest, murder these Venezuelans in 4 strikes without any due process. And then yesterday, I don't know if you, Miles, and you heard, but Pam Bondi, well, it was during that the meeting on Antifa and domestic terrorism where Donald Trump fell asleep. I have to have a few chuckles, some dark humor. Uh,
Did he really?
but
I missed that. I missed the
yeah.
fact that he was
Oh, you
snoozing.
didn't see that? Yeah. It was Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, who's waiting, going to Valhalla, and Kristi Noem and Donald Trump, and he fell asleep and his mouth started drooping. But can you talk to us about? And I'm gonna go to Miles, but this obsession with Stephen Miller and war with Central America, war with Mexico. The fact that you told me he wanted to bomb Mexico, and then what we're seeing with Venezuela.
Yeah, and I think this is coming, especially with the announcement of the war on drugs that they did. When I saw that, I was like, oh, here we go. Another step in the groundwork to head this direction. I think, and I'm sure Miles has some thoughts on this too. I think the thing about bombing cartels or the way they're framing it and enacting these things that are actually outside of the international norms that we would normally follow is I think it's all part of the strategic narrative, though, right, for Stephen Miller, because to him, it's one package deal of what he's selling Americans that we are taking on the bad guys. But the bad guys are the drug cartels, but he doesn't separate between drug cartels, immigration, immigrants, migrants, and how all the bad hombres exist, right? Those are the words they've used in the past. So I think that is part of the whole strategy is that they can continue to fuel that sort of narrative of anti-immigrant sort of crackdowns on what they're doing, even though we know that the majority of the people that they've been cracking down on right now actually don't have crimes, right? We're seeing them take people out who are here legally. Some of them have no criminal record. And they know, by the way, that there is a school of thought right now that's growing where people are not okay with what's happening in their communities. I think there are Trump supporters that can report it. I'm like, well, yeah, we believe in legal immigration. Like, we knew he was going to be tough, but like, this is too much. This is going a little bit too far, right? This is not what we thought was going to happen. For those of us that know these people, we were like, no, this is exactly what was going to happen. But I think that by doing that, it creates another additional opening policy-wise for Stephen Miller to say, no. See, we're actually going in and we're bombing the cartels now in these foreign countries because we're protecting you. And it comes back to drugs, and then it goes to fentanyl, and then it's one combined thing where when one piece isn't working, he can cloak it with their policy on it and say, no, this is what we're doing with this. And then it's packaged neatly on Fox News where they're like, oh, today we bombed whatever ship there is, or tomorrow we're going to bomb this convoy in Mexico, not because we're going outside of international norms, because those drugs were coming to America and they were coming to you and the immigrants, and then it's one package deal combined. That's my opinion.
No, absolutely. And Miles, you talk about the false flag when they're going after Antifa, which he's declared unilaterally as a terrorist organization. I would love for someone to tell me who's a member and where they organize and where I get texts from. There's been no fundraising text so far, but I digress. But this package deal, I think, what Olivia's talking about, the them, you already heard since the murder of Charlie Kirk, right? Yesterday, Miles, in this meeting where Donald Trump fell asleep. I'm just trying to connect the dots for folks because people might think, oh, yeah, let's keep the border safe and go after the drug cartels and the Venezuelans. And, oh, that doesn't impact us at home. This is what Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach with Antifa. And what they did with these cartels is murder them extrajudicially without due process. And we still don't know if in fact these Venezuelans were, fishermen or drug traffickers. And even if they were drug traffickers, stop them, arrest them, try them. Can you talk to us about how this war is expanding in real time, Miles?
Yeah. And I've got to say, Waj, it's really frustrating to see folks just waking up to this. I did everything short of self-immolate on Pennsylvania Avenue to get folks to understand that this was going to happen. I wrote 3 years ago in my book, Blowback, about an instance where Stephen Miller basically broadcast all of the things you just said. And that episode happened in 2018 as we flew down. We took the president down to Jayada South in Key West. This is a joint operations center that oversees the counter-drug operations for the federal government in the Western Hemisphere. And on the way back, on the flight on the way back to Washington, D.C., I'm sitting there with Stephen Miller and a senior member of the Coast Guard. And Miller's grilling us on whether we could launch drone strikes on these boats.
Wow.
And I will never forget the Coast Guard commandant saying to Miller, no, we can't do this. It would be a violation of international law. And Stephen, in his very unique voice, said, well, Commandant, I don't think you understand international law. And
that's a very good Stephen Miller impression. Well done.
Well, and I think, Waj, what we didn't understand, what the Commandant perhaps didn't understand in that moment, was Stephen Miller and this president who would be willing to conduct airstrikes against individuals that are not unlawful enemy combatants. They may be bad. Drug dealers are bad. But, someone who steals candy from a local convenience store is bad for having done so, but doesn't deserve to be summarily executed in front of their peers. But what was evident to me, not just with that exchange with Stephen, but after the first Trump administration, is that there was going to be a plan to go designate and investigate and eliminate terrorist targets in the Western Hemisphere that were drug cartels, but to use the same schema when it came to the domestic political opposition. And this is something that I warned at the time very, very explicitly. I said they are going to create a domestic terrorism architecture to mirror the foreign terrorism architecture we used to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And Donald Trump and his spokesman came out when I published that and said, this is all BS. This is all lies. Don't believe what he said. It's not worth a roll of toilet paper. And it's exactly what they're doing now. And this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Waj, is that Donald Trump and his allies have tried to deflect attention from these things because they will have their aides and their allies come forward and say, well, they're just joking. They're just joking. And I wrote about it this morning, and I just want to read you a piece of that because I have grown so frustrated with people continuing to get bought off with this notion that they're not going to go that far. They're not going to go that far. And I assembled just a tiny handful of these, and I wrote, his aides always tell us he's kidding. Remember when Donald Trump joked that the FCC should look into comedians for making fun of him? That was in 2019. Remember when Donald Trump joked about not accepting the election results? Of course, that was in 2020. Remember when Donald Trump joked about locking up his political opponents? Since 2016. Remember when Donald Trump joked about a second term of retribution? Remember when he joked that the Democrats were terrorists? Remember when he joked that the FBI was behind January 6th? When he joked about being a dictator, but only on day one? When he joked that journalists should be imprisoned or executed, when he joked that the military leadership should be court-martialed or shot, when he joked about sending troops into U.S. cities, and joked that parts of the Constitution should be terminated, and joked that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and joked about staying in office forever, he's not joking, Waj. The joke is on us. And we keep falling for it. Americans keep falling for it that it can't be this bad and it won't be this extreme. If you can't listen to two people who've sat in the room, two lifelong conservatives who served under this man and saw it firsthand that this is what is coming, then you don't just have your head in the sand, you are being complicit.
Well done, and I'm glad you brought the receipts. Look, I would take exception to we, because I've taken him literally and seriously, and for the past 10 years, every opportunity I've had, even when I was at CNN, I did not normalize it, which is much to the chagrin of Scott Jennings and the conservatives, and also corporate media, because You mentioned Olivia, right? That was the first time in his first administration when he wanted to use violence against peaceful BLM protesters. And at that time, his Secretary of Defense, lifelong conservative, further to the right than me and you and all those folks, was Mark Esper. Mark Esper is like, no.
No.
But now he has Pete Hegseth. He has Christy Noem, who cosplay. He has Pam Bondi. He has Kash Patel, who apparently is going to go to Valhalla, even though he has no experience being in law enforcement, right? He has Reeks and Yes Men, who are literally sharing the supervillain plot on live television. You have Stephen Miller openly just saying this. And it infuriates me, Miles, also, is because I take him literally and seriously. And there's a quote. One more quote I want to add to your amazing list of quotes. In October, right before he was elected, Donald Trump, quoting Hitler, yet again, said the following, Olivia: I will unleash the National Guard and the military against the enemy from within. And last week, he used the term enemy within. And the enemy, it seems, Olivia, is not just Tren de Aragua or Antifa or the left. I don't know if you're familiar with National Security Presidential Memo 7. Ken Klippenstein found it 2 weeks ago. No one's talking about it. I'm like you, Miles. I mean, this is for you, it's personal because you've gone after you, but who am I? I'm just a simple and frozen caveman lawyer. So I'm like, maybe they'll listen to Miles and Olivia, two conservatives who are, part and parcel of the Trump administration. But corporate media in America is like, nah, we won't even listen to them. He's hilarious. Isn't Trump hilarious? Now you have a memo, National Security Presidential Memo 7, where literally they have in writing, Olivia, that this administration is saying that they're going to use certain thoughts and rhetoric, such as anti-Christian rhetoric, anti-Trump rhetoric, anti-ICE rhetoric, as indicators of left-wing terrorism. And they have a list of tweets that Democrats have done criticizing ICE as indicators of left-wing terrorism. And I just want your thoughts about where this is going to go. And I want to remind people again, is that yesterday Pam Bondi said, and I'm going to quote her, maybe you should take her literally and seriously, folks, just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach with Antifa. They blew up those cartels. Olivia.
Yes, I guess the question is, are we just going to start bombing random buildings where they think Antifa is residing?
Yeah, I
Like,
think
so
that's where I was
what
going.
does this look like, right? And I know that sounds like hyperbolic, but like, what does that mean when Pam Bondi says that? And I think, when you see these networks that are specifically going out of their way to target people, and you see now uh, actual White House policy that is making it policy to say very openly and upfront, because they always tell us what they're going to do, right? Like we just said, they've told us, it's just whether we want to actually listen and believe it or not, is that basically anyone who expresses any dissent, anyone who goes against them, is basically a part of this either Antifa movement or left-wing terrorism. I mean, so where do you draw the line on that is my concern. And I'm concerned about what that means going forward for using the rule of law against anyone who exercises, let's get to the bottom line here. Because it really is about free speech.
Yep.
So now you have a people that are, I come from that party who they were the free speech advocates, right? I mean, that was like ride or die on that tenet. And what they're saying here is that they are going to crack down on anyone who dares stand up. And so my concern is, what does it look like? The second and third order effects of that is fear. It's creating fear and creating a chilling effect so that you're not out there exercising your right to speak, so that you're not taking a stand on them and they can continue to gain control on it. And so I think that is sort of what their ultimate goal is here and messaging. And we're seeing it across the board, right? I mean, we're seeing professors get targeted now, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you were asking who's the head of Antifa. Well, I don't know, Waj. I was reading online that isn't it that professor at Rutgers that's getting all the death threats now, like where he actually was
moving
thinking
to
about leaving
Canada?
the country. Yes,
Who's
he
moving
was
to
thinking about
Canada?
leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, all because he actually studies anti-fascist movements. And so now they have decided there's a whole group of internet trolls and everything who are making his life a living hell because they've decided that he is a member of Antifa. And he's like, wait, I am a professor of terrorism, professor of anti-fascist movements. Like I am an educator. So I guess he now is classified under that NSPM 7 as a basically dissenter, domestic terrorist.
Well, I mean,
go ahead, Miles.
well, I was going to say, one of the things, like all of this, you can go back in time and find the start of the through line in the first Trump administration. And, we mentioned Mark Esper revealing that Trump wanted to shoot protesters in 2020. It started years before that. He told us in the Oval Office years before that episode with Mark that he wanted to shoot migrants as they were coming toward the border, which is something that I revealed to the New York Times or to New York Times journalists shortly thereafter. And we had to remind the president about the military rules of engagement at the border because he wanted to deploy the military, shoot migrants as a form of deterrence to keep them from arriving at the border. This was on top of other elements of deterrence he came up with, the idea that the spikes on the border should be so sharp on the border wall that it would slice their hands and that you would see gruesome bodies hanging there and that would dissuade them, the idea of snakes and alligators in a moat along a pit along the border, all of these insane ideas of deterrence. But one was to shoot them. And so the president had to be reminded, Mr. President, there's rules of engagement here. The military cannot shoot unarmed civilians. And so the president's response was, well, then just shoot them in the legs. And if you've been down to the U.S. southern border, a lot of women and children coming in, a lot of pregnant mothers showing up there at the border. That didn't seem to faze the president of the United States. But I bring the rules of engagement up because we heard last week on Tuesday when the generals were assembled in Virginia, the Secretary of Defense indicate that the shackles were coming off, that the rules of engagement would be loosened. Pair that with the fact that the president brought up that rhetoric again, Waj, about the enemy within, and emphasized that the military's mission was going to be to use U.S. cities as training grounds. We're not talking about loosening the rules of engagement to go after Taliban fighters. We're talking about loosening the rules of engagement to go after the domestic opposition. This is not hyperbole, and I'm glad you brought up NSPM 7 because Ken and I were, and you were among the very few to start talking about NSPM 7, this order issued the other week, which provides the legal architecture for designating domestic groups as terrorist organizations, and then all of the other things that we used to be able to do to foreign terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, to be able to do those to the domestic groups. Now, your question was, what's going to happen next? Definitely that through line ends up in places like use of force by the military against the opposition. That's where this story can end. But between now and then, there is a very bureaucratic process, what's been called the banality of evil. Evil doesn't just show up with a jackboot that kicks down your door in the barrel of a gun. It's bureaucratic, it's slow, and that's what makes it so insidious. And that first part of the process, in my view, is going to be the watch listing process. That's how our terrorism architecture worked, that Olivia and I helped oversee inside the federal government, is once you have that architecture set up, you identify someone as a terrorist suspect, you have to ingest them somewhere into the big bureaucracy of the United States government to start bringing them to justice. What do? They get added to the terrorist watch list. Then they can be tracked and monitored and harassed and arrested or killed if need be, whatever's going to happen on that spectrum. And what NSPM 7 has done that almost no mainstream outlet has reported is it has opened the floodgates for American citizens to be added en masse to the terrorist watch list without judicial review, without oversight, and without our awareness. In fact, I strongly suspect this is happening already. And let me tell you why this isn't just hyperbole. NSPM 7 directs all the terrorism task forces in America. There are dozens of these across the country, dozens of them of FBI agents and DHS agents. It directs them that their top priority must now be to investigate these cases of domestic terrorism. Again, these are good Americans in a lot of these places that work in law enforcement, but now their directive is you got to open up investigations into these groups. And when you do that, and when you identify suspects, your typical protocol is you start adding them to the terrorist watch list if they look like they're a member of that group. We're going to see Americans added there, and that doesn't just affect your ability potentially to board a flight, although often you won't know. That can result in everything from denial of travel to asset seizure to public blacklisting to some of these more extreme measures that we mentioned. But this is how the machinery gets moving, and that abuse of the watch list is the really big thing I'm talking to members of Congress about paying attention to, because it's going to be our leading indicator that we've moved into a fully different phase of fascism.
And to your point, Miles, the one group that actually takes it literally and seriously are NGOs. NGOs have come out in mass and talked about the threat because, folks, I protest the war on terror. I knew what America was doing in response to the terror attack of 9/11 would be disastrous. There were 19 foreign hijackers who brought down the two towers, and America decided to bomb Iraq and bomb Afghanistan and Yemen and Somalia. But what we did at home is we supercharged the military-industrial complex, and we created ICE, and we created the Patriot Act, and we created national registries. And the FBI did knocks on Muslim doors and Arab doors. People were kicked off of flights. NGOs, charities, they went after. They said, material support for foreign terrorism, right? Once you designate a group, there's a chilling effect. Freedom of speech, people go underground, people have trouble getting contracts, people have trouble operating, they get burdened with lawsuits. Like Miles was saying, so many of us used to get flagged at airports, random security checkpoints, right? The whole goal is to make you bend the knee. The whole goal is to say, we have the power of the state, you are they, them, the enemy, and we will then crush you in any way, shape, or form. And for this Trump administration, that means extrajudicial murder, no problem. Labeling you a traitor, that's what they did to Miles. Executive order. He said that Miles and Chris Krebs are traitors for simply doing their job. What did Chris Krebs do? He did his job. He did his job and said, hey, the 2020 election was clean and you lost. And he's like, I don't like that. You're a traitor. And then yesterday, folks, a quote from Donald Trump, because like Olivia said, he just blurts it out at his old Commander Cankles here, who's withering away in real time. He said, quote, we took the freedom of speech away. He said it openly on camera. Olivia, for those who, still, a lot of people might listen to this and be like, well, Waj, I'm not Muslim. I'm not a former Trump national security advisor like you, Olivia, or Miles. I'm not Venezuelan. I'm not El Salvadoran. I'm not undocumented. I'm not transgender. This is America. I'll be okay. And there's still people, I think Miles was talking about that, this delusion that, oh, the guardrails will hold. Oh, this is America. Oh, this, I've heard this so many times. I'm sure you've heard it and you feel like bashing your head against the wall. He was president already the first time. It didn't happen. It won't affect me. It'll go away by itself. For those Americans who still haven't woken up, with the infrastructure and the architecture that you all have described, that was the wet dream of Stephen Miller and Donald Trump in Trump 1, but now is the reality in Trump 2. Your response to our fellow Americans who think that they'll be okay?
I think, I can understand that there is a school of thought here in the United States that it could never happen here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That authoritarianism, that a failing democracy situation. Well, we're America. That would never happen here, right? We have the rule of law. We're a nation of laws. We have parameters. We have checks and balances. I'm not seeing the checks and balances. I mean, we are hoping that the courts hold and that judges hold, and some of them have, right? Some of them have, and that's important. But I think the greater thing here that we keep talking about and the worry is about when you have a government that is looking for totalitarianism. And you don't, and I think, I've been doing a lot of work and like research on George Orwell. There's a movie, Orwell, 2 + 2 = 5. I highly recommend that y'all watch. We'll get into that at some point. I really strongly recommend you see that film. It's Raoul Peck who did I Am Not Your Negro, and he's an Oscar-nominated director. And he does a good job of threading all the different conflicts around the world that have happened. And Orwell once said, and the school of thought of you don't actually have to live in a totalitarian state completely to experience totalitarianism. And I think that is what we're living today. Does that make sense? Like, we are living
Hungry, like
right
hungry.
now. And it may not seem like, oh, they have full control. I mean, we still feel like it's America. We still have freedoms. But I think to get to one of Miles's points, though, is my concern, and I write a lot because this is something I'm very passionate about, having worked on FISA 702 along the way as a young Bush staffer after 9/11, seeing the revisiting of FISA 702 with people on the Hill, prepping people for testimony on it, looking at terrorism laws. Like, my concern is when I look at NSPM 7 and the doors that it opens is the surveillance state.
Yep.
Because that is direction. That is the direction that we're going in, and the invasion of privacy. And what I think that people fail to realize is this is happening in real time, right? I mean, you have Palantir employees who have come forward, and I write about privacy and what Palantir is doing behind the scenes. Palantir, back in the day, I was one of the people that met with them at the National Counterterrorism Center, and all the efforts they were doing for these terrorism databases and all the good work that we were doing to keep Americans safe. Well, Palantir is now deployed at ICE. And now they have contracts there. And now we have the merging of all these databases. And now we have the breaches of data that happened because of DOJ. Now we have the Medicaid data that's being combined. Now we have them access to immigrant databases. I'm saying it's across the board. And then you've got the overturning of oversight bodies, right? The inspectors generals have been followed, all of these things that were normal checks and balances within the government have been steamrolled.
But I have to say, Olivia, I mean, I agree with you on absolutely everything. I think people like us, the three of us who have a relatively developed prefrontal cortex, tend to be drawn towards the litany of arguments for why our republic is corroding in real time, when it actually doesn't require half a brain to understand what's going on. A really, really sick and psychotic man took over power in the United States. And there's a headline that just dropped that I think sums it all up. This is from The Guardian. Headline is, Norway braces for Trump's reaction if he does not win the Nobel Peace Prize. The subtitle, U.S. President may impose tariffs, demand higher NATO contributions, or even declare Norway an enemy, analysts say.
I've been actually thinking about this. I'm so glad you said that, Miles. I'm so glad you said that, because I was actually thinking about this last night. I was like, okay, it's Friday. And I was like, oh, God, what is he going to do if he's not named as it? Like, what kind of reaction will he do? And we know he's going to react.
They
right?
gave it to Kissinger. They gave it to Obama for doing. Just give it to him. Just give it to him. Just that's my take. If it means saving the world, if it means saving some brown people from a temper tantrum, just be like, no, here, and then just like, you're like a baby, like, oh, there you go, the best. This is the best Nobel Peace Prize, the shiniest one, the biggest one. He goes, really, the biggest one, the biggest one we've ever made. For me, for you, did I deserve it? You deserve it. There you go, Donald. Good job. That's what I would do. Just to save people.
Waj, I gotta say, it would be literary to the core for the Nobel Peace Prize Committee to save the world and to keep it peaceful by giving a warmonger the Nobel Peace Prize. You can't make that up. That has got so many. That is a tiramisu cake of irony. I mean, that is something. We need to write.
Inscribed? Can we inscribe that on the trophy, though? It's got to be in the actual wording of it.
This is the greatest Nobel Peace Prize for the greatest, bestest president of all time, who is the most peaceful award. He's like, and then he just write it all down there and then give it to him with the big ribbon, and then compare sizes between that Nobel Peace Prize and Obama's and say, like, you got the bigger one, Mr. President. Thank you. I know I deserve it. And then like later on in history.
On the commentary, not to interrupt, I love somebody just commented and said, if it gets all the Democrats off the watch list, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Miles, but in all seriousness, we need some moment of catharsis and levity, because we're dealing with such an unhinged character that was normalized by corporate media, by Republicans. And for 10 years, a point that Miles made, and just what we're talking about around, I just bring it back to the circle. This is who Trump has always been, folks. I want to repeat this. This is who Trump has always been. I've been keeping the receipts on him for 10 years. When I was invited to CNN, there was a panel, Miles and Olivia. It was that huge like 10-person roundtable, and they were doing it in DC during the inauguration. So they said we're going to do running coverage. I'm like, all right. So I was not a official CNN commentator, but they invited me, and it was like 8 people. And I'm not using it as a pejorative, but you know what I mean. One of the establishment talking heads were all there. And this was when Sean Spicer came out, if you all remember, in his first press conference. And Sean Spicer's first press conference to the world was, Donald Trump had the biggest inauguration. You guys are lying. Don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. Straight up 1984 shit, right? 2 + 2 = 5. And then everyone was like, oh, this is hyperbole. Oh, Donald Trump will be reined in. Oh, the Republicans, the adults in the room. And I remember I was the only one, Olivia and Miles, who said, this is a sneak preview. This is who Donald Trump is. This is not normal. We have Sean Spicer, the friggin' press secretary of the President of the United States of America, telling the world to not believe our lying eyes. This is what we're dealing with. And then they kept me on. They're like, and then in the back room, I remember in the green room, people in hushed tones were like, yeah, man, good job. You said it. Good job. Uh, and I'm like, why don't you say it, right? So I just want people to know he's always been this way. He has telegraphed from the first Trump administration what he's planning to do, which is why Miles and Olivia resigned. But back then, folks, there were some checks. There was an Olivia, a Miles, even a friggin' Esper was there. Millie was there. Even you had General Kelly, who was there, right? You had Mattis, who was there. You might not agree with them, but nonetheless, they had fidelity to rule of law and the Constitution. And now all those guardrails are gone. And you did mention, Olivia, the Palantir, and I'm glad because it was going to be a follow-up question. And Miles or Olivia, take it away because I don't think enough people know. Palantir is run by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the billionaire who has groomed J.D. Vance and hand-delivered him to the Trump administration. Palantir has what, multi-billion-dollar contract with the United States government, uh, uh, with Doge, with Palantir, and with them giving this information to ICE, and with the architecture that you've described, Miles. Can you talk to us about how Palantir and the tech bros are helping this authoritarian regime go after and or identify they and them, which is the rest of us?
Well, Liv, I think you might be better suited to answer
All
that
right, go for it.
question. I just want to say one tiny thing, though, at the top end, though. I think it's very interesting that Peter Thiel is in the midst of delivering a 4-part lecture series on the Antichrist. You can't really trust a guy who says over and over again, I'm not the Antichrist, I'm not the Antichrist, I'm not the Antichrist. You want to really start worrying about that person's character when no one's asked them if they're the Antichrist and they're actively denying that they are. Something very strange going in to the psychology of a person like that. But Liv, I would love to get your perspective on this because I feel like we've had a 20-year debate on whether we should have a giant nationwide database on Americans, everything from a national ID number down to consolidating all that data. And Congress, Democrats and Republicans have roundly said, hell no, we don't want that. We're never going to build that. It was like the biggest debate post 9/11. And now it kind of seems to be happening on the back end.
Yeah, and it's happening, by the way, without oversight or
There you go.
acknowledgement that it is happening. That is what I think is the most disturbing to me, is the fact that this is just sort of being done. And it's almost like, and you know this, Miles, like it's sort of like it is kind of the administration's MO and the way they've operated. Although people pushed back in the past, now we're in a situation where they're not, where their mentality is just do it and maybe get caught and figure out how you're going to address it later. And maybe there'll be litigation in the courts and maybe they'll catch up to us in the long run. But by that point, the damage is done. And so I think my concerns on this is that we don't know what they're going to do with this. I mean, they're saying that they're going to focus on undocumented individuals. They're saying that they're going to focus on tracking and surveillance of them. But there's actually a letter from Palantir employees who wrote a letter who said, we have concerns about what is happening here with the company. We have concerns about the ethics that our company was built on. and we have concerns about how this could be misused. And they're actually asking for Congress to do oversight on it, which I think they need to do if possible. But given the leadership that we have in Congress, I'm not sure that it's going to get there. But I say this because Miles is absolutely right. I will own this. Wise, you know me. I own my. I'm going to be going to penance for who knows how long. Like, I own the things that I have participated in the past. And I have one of those things, like, if it keeps Americans safe, I've had that moral debate with myself. And a lot of people are like, well, how do you use surveillance for good? Then where is the line for using surveillance for bad? Then who's defining what's good? Who's defining what's bad?
Yeah.
That has been the long-standing debate, right? Which you mentioned this at the beginning, where you were out there protesting that you knew what this could come to. You knew people would be, targeted. Well, now we're in a situation where the Supreme Court basically has said, that's cool, man. Go ahead with the racial profiling. Go ahead and do that.
Yep.
So
Go ahead. No problem in LA.
Yeah.
Racially profile.
It's cool. Green light. So now I'm sitting here looking at this going, okay, great. Oh, great. Okay. Racial profiling. Check. Okay. Now we've got these massive databases that are talking to each other, possibly. Now we've got possible surveillance. Now you want ICE, who wants full scan and biometrics. I mean, these are things that are openly being reported and talked about how they're looking at things so that they can use technology. But my question is, then we're really heading into, I would say, like, Big Brother surveillance territory, which, if you're looking at civil liberties and privacy and freedoms, is very concerning. And it should concern all of us, regardless of your political standing or background, right? Because at some point, it can be used and misused by people in power.
It's Orwellian. You're right. And, Palantir, the name, because, of course, these people don't understand pop culture. Well, it was used in Lord of the Rings and by Saruman, the evil magician, to spy on Middle Earth. And just to connect the dots, folks, surveillance state. That's what we're looking at. A surveillance state that gobbles up all of your data and gives that data to this Trump administration that openly is against free speech, is openly against critics, is openly willing to subvert the Constitution, the rule of law, to silence people like Jimmy Kimmel, using extortion, willing to go after Miles, willing to go after Chris Krebs, willing to extrajudicially assassinate whom they assume or tell the people are drug dealers without any due process. Not that they're sending the National Guard and the military and ICE against they, them, Antifa, right? Think about all the data. Think about who they can identify. Think about what happens when these people get in the terrorism database, right? Just think about it, folks. You don't have to even think about it. We've seen it in the past 2 decades. And to connect the dots real quick, Peter Thiel is the South African PayPal broligarchy billionaire who funded J.D. Vance's entire political career, hand-delivered him to Donald Trump. And J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel follow this broke-ass fascist basement bro Curtis Yarvin, who believes in a techno-fascist future where he openly says that we should not have democracy, we should have essentially a king. And then you have Russell Vought, a white Christian nationalist, openly, who's the co-author of Project 2025, who now Donald Trump has bear-hugged, because he's bear-hugged Project 2025, Miles, after lying to the American people and saying he had no idea what it was. He just released an AI video with him and Russell Vought dancing like Grim Reapers, not making this shit up. And then you have Stephen Miller, a white nationalist. So you got the white nationalist, the white Christian nationalist, and the techno-fascist. At the end of the day, the end game is still fascism. It's authoritarianism. It's absolute control by the few. And I wanted to ask you, Miles, as we're talking about all this, and Stephen Miller, glitched in real time because he blurted out the plot. He used the words plenary authority in CNN, and then later said it was a technical glitch. I've seen that video. There was no technical glitch. He literally froze after he publicly made a mistake. It was something fascinating. I think you all should see it. If I can find the clip, I'll drop it in the comment section. But that sent chills down my spine because he revealed the plot. Can you tell us about plenary authority and the endgame?
Well, I'll tell you. I asked. I was over at CNN, and I'm blanking on who was the the name of the anchor that was on for that
Boris?
segment.
Boris?
Yes, I was.
Boris Sanchez
I
is his
was.
name? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was on with Boris later that day, and I asked him about it, and he was frustrated because CNN edited the clip just because the audio went out, and he's like, "Look, no conspiracy theory here. Stephen said what he said. I don't know how he was going to finish the thought, but his earpiece started getting a feed from CNN International, and so he paused because he was confused about what was happening. And once they brought him back on, he didn't finish that thought. But Stephen was getting ready to go down the road, Waj, of, in his mind, the legal justification for their pursuit of the closest thing that we have in the American system to martial law. But I want to pause there for a second and admit something, because if we had had a conversation like this 10 years ago, Waj, I would have been in your face about it. And I would have said, all of your fear-mongering about U.S. counterterrorism tools was misplaced because we had the people and the policies and the processes in place to make sure, by and large, that innocent people didn't end up on the terrorist watch list, and that innocent people weren't pursued, and that while imperfect, we were honing a system to be able to go after people who wanted to do Americans harm and who definitionally under the law were terrorists. And I have to say, Waj, you were right and I was wrong,
I get no joy.
because the people have been replaced, the policies have been subverted, and the processes have been hijacked. And the failure of imagination of people like me was, well, we'll never have an obvious autocrat sitting in the White House. And so all of these layers will safeguard against these tools being misused. Now, certainly there were instances of abuse, but it's not like the terrorist watch listing process was designed to persecute First Amendment protected speech. But now, like I said, you were right, I was wrong. Those civil liberties protections withered. They dried up like water on hot asphalt once someone like Donald Trump came into the White House. And that's what we are dealing with here. Take it from a guy who spent the majority of the time since 9/11 defending that system is now being abused for autocratic purposes. It is real.
No, this I appreciate. Look, you and Olivia, it takes a lot, especially in this day and age where everything is measured by ownage and people being pawned on Twitter, especially the right wing language I'm using and abusing, right? And humility is seen as a weakness, and growth is seen as a weakness, and empathy is seen as a weakness. So I appreciate both of you, taking stock and auditing of your own career and your own growth. We all make mistakes, myself included, and we get no joy, folks. This is like it's the world's worst. I told you so. What do we get? Fascism? Is that my prize? What we're trying to do instead is inform people to wake up. I've kept you all for a while. I'm going to keep you just for a couple more minutes, but a way out, and just because Donald Trump is such a vulgarian, because everything is so upside down, the usual levers that we could pull, Olivia, to keep him in check might not be working. However, he does have weaknesses. And there is a major weakness that I think keeps coming up, 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 up. And no matter how much he tries, he cannot get rid of it. And one of his major Achilles cankles, in my opinion, is the Epstein files. And Thomas Massey, Roe Massey. I combined Roe and Kana and Thomas Massey into one person. Thomas Massey, a couple hours ago, it said there's another Epstein list. He says the FBI has been sitting on files naming 20 more men. And he says there's another high-profile U.S. official. You have seen the Epstein files royal MAGA. They radicalized MAGA for the past 10 years with the deep state and the QAnon conspiracy theory. They promised the release of the Epstein files. Now you have Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and Pam Bondi as the deep state. You've seen Candace Owens go on a warpath, which I won't lie, kind of amazing divide and conquer technique happening right now in MAGA. You've seen Marjorie, which I'm exploiting. I'm exploiting that shit every day. As soon as Candace goes against Laura Loomer goes against Candace, I retweet all of them. But talk to us about the Epstein files, because over 80% of Americans, it's the one thing Americans agree on. Republicans, MAGA, independent, Democrats want the release of the Epstein files. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene and Massey know. This is my take, Olivia. I want you and Miles on this. I think this is a major weakness. I think we have to exploit the weakness to weaken Donald Trump. I feel like there has to be accountability for all these girls who were raped. And I feel like some of these Republicans see where the wind is blowing and realize the people are turning on Trump. He's old, he's overreaching, and that once these Epstein files come out, because they will, it'll drag the party down. Your take.
You know, it's interesting because Jan 6 didn't seem to break the fever.
Nope.
But I think that maybe this is it. And I think that it's important for people to just keep hammering away at it. Keep hammering away at it. And, you know, I mean, it was kind of frustrating in the lead up. And, you know, there'll be people that disagree with me. But part of me, when I was watching the negotiations on the government shutdown and what was happening here between the Republicans and the Dems, part of me really just wanted the Democrats to be like, okay, you know what? We'll agree to this. We'll make a deal with you. Just release the Epstein files. Why wasn't that the focus point? Just release the files. We'll come to the table.
I'm with you. Like I think the Epstein files should be in the news. I think every single day, on the steps of the Capitol Hill. There you go. That's it. That's all. That's exactly. Someone should come there every single day. And you saw something happening yesterday, and Miles, I'll give it to you in a second. But yesterday was really good in the sense that I think it was Senator Kelly from Arizona. They were talking to the press. They were inside the Capitol, and they saw Mike Johnson walking by. And while the cameras were on, they went and said, "How come you haven't appointed the representative from Arizona, Adelita Grijalva, right? Because she gives you the 218th vote." And folks, listen, just to connect, I know there's a lot. She won her election 2 weeks ago. She's been in D.C., swear me in. Mike Johnson, before the shutdown, has refused to swear her in. The reason why he's refusing to swear her in is she gives the 218th vote. She said she's going to vote to release the Epstein files. I said cynically yesterday, but I don't put it past this administration. They'll never, ever, ever swear her in. Like they would rather shut the government down for the next 3 years until Trump dies or whenever, until swearing her in. But Miles.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm glad you brought up Epstein, Waj, because, you know, some folks have been saying, well, you know, they're not going to do anything. The story's over. And I had a conversation yesterday with Congressman Garcia, who's the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee. And I asked him a question. And I said, you know, Congressman, you're doing everything you can, even though you're in the minority, you're the ranking member, to try to break this investigation open. But let's say the Democrats win the House. What's going to happen? What changes when Democrats win the House? And Waj, people have been cynical about the Democrats retaking the House because only so much can be done to check Donald Trump's power. But I'll tell you the thing he has no control over, that he fears greatly if the Democrats retake the House, and the congressman said this, is the subpoena power. And when that subpoena power is used against administration officials, I have no illusions. They're going to say no. They're going to thumb their nose at Capitol Hill. The attorney general's going to ignore them. They're going to ignore them. But when other people, private American citizens who have evidence here in this case, people who can implicate Donald Trump, are served with those subpoenas, they're going to face a choice, Waj. They can either go and testify truthfully to the United States Congress, or it's like on the Monopoly board, when you get to that square that says go to jail, they will know if they refuse those subpoenas. It may not be enforced right away, but eventually there is going to be a president and an attorney general who see those people who refused those lawful subpoenas, and they are going to go to jail for having done that. And that leverage is going to, mark my words, if the Democrats win the House, that leverage is going to allow them to bring forward a lot of these truths and contradictions and discrepancies and show that this is indeed one of the greatest, if not the biggest, presidential scandals in American history.
I think this is the biggest cover up. We found out from Wall Street Journal that flaming Antifa rag that Pam Bondi told Donald Trump in May that he's all up in the files, which means they have been lying to us. Truly believe, Olivia and Miles, that Donald Trump is terrified of releasing the Epstein files. I think he will burn the country down rather than release the Epstein files. And I think he knows if those Epstein files come out, it's over for him. His own base will turn on him, which is why you're seeing the desperate attempts, folks. Which is why both for accountability for all these victims who were raped by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, these girls, and also for the fact of accountability, truth, and justice, and also for the weakness. I think this is it. I mean, and Olivia, you said something which is depressing. It should have been the insurrection, but America's like, eh. It should have been the fraud. America's like, eh. It should have been the criminality, meh. It should have been the sexual assault, meh. It should have been, unleashing ICE and the military and the National Guard, meh. But the Epstein files, folks, might be the thing. I really believe that's his Achilles cankles on both cankles. The final question for you and Miles is, what's the end game, Olivia, if we don't resist? Where is Stephen Miller and Trump taking us? Because I've seen, due to the Epstein files, due to the economy, due to the fact that he's lost the numbers, due to his age, I do not think he's well. I've seen Project 2025, which was supposed to be a 4-year plan. They seem to be trying to implement it in 1 year. And I think they're desperate. I think this is a sign of desperation, weakness, the false flags, unleashing the ice. This is like the haymakers that they're throwing. And that's what's really scary. But it also gives me hope that what we're witnessing is a cornered rat. What's the end game? According, you tell me what you see their end game in the next couple of months, and how can we stop it?
I mean, I think their end game is everything they're doing is knowing with the future of the elections in full scope, right? How do they maintain power? And I think that they're going to do that, whether it's executive orders when it comes to elections, right? I mean, we're seeing that. We're seeing them demand election lists. We're seeing them go after at the state level. I think there's so many layers to this, whether it's sort of these executive orders that are happening in terms of that space, whether it's domestic terrorism and leftist terrorism, as they call it. And so I think that this is the groundworks and Insurrection Act, martial law, so that they can just sort of bypass the will of the people and remain in power. But I think that what we know, even in past moments of autocracy and other places, is that it really is the power of the people banding together that can make the difference, right? To make them back down. And I think that that is the critical thing that we need to keep in mind. And remember, do not let these fear tactics, as scary as they are, prevent you from showing up, right? That's partially, Miles and I showed up. We were there at the courthouse for the James Comey hearing. We were outside and there were other people there. And it was encouraging to see people still show up and still say, no, this is not okay. This is an abuse of the rule of law. We're not going to stand by this. And I think that that is important because, as Miles was there yesterday and he said this very eloquently. Courage inspires courage, right? And that is important.
Hope begets hope, courage begets courage. And folks, we've seen it in real time. People responded with their wallet. Disney backtracked and brought back Jimmy Kimmel. Sinclair backtracked. Sinclair is a bunch of reeks for Trump. They backtracked. Next Gen backtracked. Furthermore, what you saw in the streets of Chicago and Portland, this type of joyful resistance in Portland, because this is, of course, the 7th level of hell, and we're seeing giant frogs and people dressed up in costumes. But it does. It's like a type of absurdity. If Portland's such a war zone, why are these people in costumes, peacefully protesting ICE? It's terrible. Terrible optic for the Trump administration. Also, you saw people peacefully surrounding ICE officers asking for warrants. They didn't interfere. And you saw these ICE officers, I don't know if you saw this video in Chicago, after 3 minutes, they just gave up. They're like, forget it. And they just left the guy. And now you're seeing cars follow cars, these ICE cars, and just honk. It's kind of an amazing type of just community response to what's happening. No King's rally, folks. All of this makes a difference because they don't have the numbers. Same question to you, Miles. And with you, Miles, for those who don't know, you're really targeted. I remember a couple of months ago, I've been trying to make this point again and again, even though it's the first time we're talking. I said, Donald Trump is so cruel that he has decided to sign an executive orders targeting Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs simply because he's pissed off that they criticized him. And he is, last time I checked, calling you a traitor. Last time I checked, the penalty for treason is death. And yet still you're here on the left hook with Olivia, 2,500 people, and you're not being silent, which I think is very, very commendable. I don't know if anyone else could do that. But final words to you as to why you have decided to speak out and not stay silent, and your recommendation to people to go up against this cankled wannabe dictator.
Well, I would ask folks perhaps a rhetorical question, which is, if I am guilty of the highest crime envisioned in the United States Constitution, a crime that's tantamount to murder, why am I on this program right now? Why am I roaming free? Why am I not in a jail cell? And I mean that seriously. If the president of the United States, if the leader of the free world believes he's found an individual that's guilty of treason against the United States, why have we let that person roam free for 6 months to the day? 6 months ago, that order came out. I will give you the answer. Because they don't have evidence. Because the president issued the verdict and then directed his lieutenants to go find the evidence. That's not how the justice system works, Waj. And I would like to say that the moment that the order came out, the answer was obvious to me. I was going to go fight back. That's not how it plays out. The reality is, probably most of the people I'm close to in my life said, please just lay low and maybe it goes away. And credit to my wife, who Olivia knows, for being the family's adamantium spinal cord. Ultimately, she was the one who said, no. If we do that, if we lay low, it becomes easier for this to happen to the next person and the next person. And it's why I titled my publication here on Substack, Treason. Because, Waj, if it is now treasonous in the United States to engage in dissent, then I am very, very proud to be a traitor. And I will accept that moniker and wear that badge. But what's more awe-inducing for me is that so many other people amidst those types of threats have come out and supported you and Olivia and me and gone and stood there in front of the courthouse and continue to speak out and cancel their subscriptions when companies bend the knee to the dictator and show up in the streets at things like No Kings. And I would just echo what Olivia said. That is the answer right now. If the end game is autocracy, if the end game is an indefinite presidency, which I do think it is, I do think, like Olivia said, that they want to subvert the democratic process. We'd be idiots to think they don't. They did it before. He wanted to prevent the transfer of power before. This man didn't find God last week. He's going to do that again. And if that's the end goal, then our response has to be mass mobilization. It has to be courage, and it has to be solidarity. That is the recipe for overturning an autocracy, and we're going to have to familiarize ourselves with it in America. We are in the earliest innings of that. There are 1,200 more days of this, and folks who are listening right now, we're going to have to stick together. This is going to get rockier, but there is a choice. We have a choice about whether we kneel or stand up, and I hope we choose the latter.
I don't kneel to any kings or queens. I don't kneel to any dictators. I only worship God, and that's it. That's the only entity I would ever kneel to, especially not a cankled criminal. vulgarian named Donald Trump, who represents the worst vices and sins of America and its carnal appetites. And we have the numbers, folks. They do not have the numbers. I want to say this again, ending on a hopeful note. They know they don't have the numbers. They know they're leaking oil. They know these scandals cannot be swept under the rug. They know the Epstein files are coming out. They know they're losing Candace Owens' support and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who came out today. They know the economy is underwater. They know that people are pissed off about the gas prices. And they are also very reckless and incompetent. These are all strengths for the majority to our strengths that we can exploit against these folks. And the way we do it is we use our bodies. We come out. We come out in the streets. We are peaceful. We show up. We have courage. We help each other. We have empathy. We realize finally that you can't throw Latinos under the bus. You can't throw Muslims under the bus. You can't throw farmers under the bus. We're all in it together, folks. It's all of us. We're all fighting for our freedoms, our rights, our democracy, and our country. And we have the numbers. Folks, I thank you, the 2,600 people who are watching. Lev was here. Who would have thought? If I could get another person on, I'd get Lev on. Lev was here. God's here. Thank you, God, for coming on and blessing this conversation. Olivia and Miles, shamelessly promote yourself. Olivia, you first.
I'm here on Substack, it's Olivia Troye, and on social media, same name.
This is the thing, Olivia. You have to think like Pete Hegseth. You have to be more
Yeah,
shameless.
that wasn't shameless.
That was a child of immigrants. That was like you and me. You're like, I'm sorry. I apologize. Forgive me. I apologize for writing.
Let me step in for Olivia.
Yeah.
Olivia has been relentless since the day we first met inside the Trump administration, when she allied herself not with the side of the crazies, but with the rational folks, and said, wait a second, we can't put up with this. We can't just start closing our borders to people who don't agree with the president, and we can't be designating our fellow Americans terrorists. She has shown backbone well before you ever knew her name, and continues to across social media platforms. I hope people are following her here. I laud my friend Olivia for her courage. She displays it every single day. So for that, Liv, I, for one, am very grateful.
That's how you do it. That's how you do it, Olivia. And Olivia, return the favor for Miles.
Oh, man, Miles and I go way back. We have lived through the thick of it, whether it was inside or outside. But I am tremendously grateful for the example that he set for others. From whether it was the very beginning of the anonymous op-ed, which I proudly read inside the White House bathroom because I thought that was the only place I could actually read it safely. True story. Miles knows this.
Wow.
And that was
I only like to write things that people feel like they have to read in the bathroom. That's really what I aspire to.
Which I share that because that's the level of paranoia when it comes to working in a wannabe surveillance state. And that was back then. We are miles ahead of that in today's world. But he has been, he is obviously the subject of retribution right now. And I will say this, you should definitely follow him on Substack. He is very thoughtful in everything that he says and does. And he shows tremendous courage by standing up every day. And I will say, Miles, we will all be there should you end up in a courthouse. I promise you. Awaj, you and I have to commit to this. We will lead the charge. We will be out front, and I will be raising hell.
Inshallah, we'll not get to that point because this administration is so incompetent, reckless, and overwhelmed with the majority that they have 19 other catastrophic fires of their own making to put out inside the White House. So hopefully Miles can continue writing and his wife can continue supporting him. And like me, Miles also married up. So if there's a lesson for all the single folks, just marry up. Only good things happen when you marry up in life. I'm telling you. My wife was far more educated than me. She's smarter than me. She's hotter than me. Life is great, guys. Everyone knows. Everyone, like my own parents. I'm an only child. My parents are like, she's better than you. I'm like, I know. So only thing, right, Miles? Marry up. Correct?
Amen.
Yeah. Folks, thank you for watching. This is the Left Hook. I'm a terrible capitalist. There's no paywalls. Everything's free because I want people to be informed. If you have some money, give it to Treason with Miles Taylor or give it to Olivia's Substack. If there's a few bucks left over, send it over to me because I have 800 kids. If not, just subscribe, share this conversation. Be informed. Don't take it from me, folks. I've been saying it. I know it's the world's worst I told you so tour, but you have two national security experts. This is what they've done their entire lives. And more importantly, they've been in the room with these terrible human beings like Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. They've heard it. And they were so horrified by it that they resigned. And as such, they paid a price. But hopefully, I do think, and I do believe, I'll end on this, Olivia, Miles, we only live once. Like I said before, as you know, I'm a Muslim. I believe in God. Meet my creator one day. You want to meet your creator, or if you don't believe in God, it's fine. The legacy that you leave behind, you want it to be something honorable and ethical. Do you want to stand up for what's right? Do you want to oppose fascists? Do you want to oppose dictators? Do you want to be on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized? And if the answer is yes, you're the hero of the story. And that's a life well lived. I sincerely believe that. Folks, take care of yourself, be kind, be decent, and please, oh, please, don't be a fascist. In fact, maybe you should be anti fascist. Just saying. Miles, Olivia, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Waj.
Bye.